Hey friends, thank you for tuning in once again to VR Revelations. Welcome. It is January 31st, the year of our Lord 2023. So, will Russia use nuclear bombs in Ukraine? Well, it seems like a man from an Academy of Military Sciences actually thinks that Russia should, at the very least, hold nuclear tests, like actual physical nuclear explosions. Now, most of these major nuclear superpowers carry out these tests via computer programs, where they estimate how big the yield will be and how much destruction it will cause. But we really haven't seen an actual nuclear test by any of these major nuclear superpowers since literally like the 1960s. So it's very interesting because since the war started, I always wondered why Russia didn't use, at the very least, small tactical nuclear weapons. My thinking was that, they can save themselves the loss of many Russian soldiers if they use some of these nuclear weapons to put an end to the conflict, much like the United States did with Japan when they dropped bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, right? One of their justifications was to prevent the loss of further life. They would use these massive weapons to have the desired impact, right? To shock the Japanese into surrender. And I was scrolling yesterday through my Telegram Russian channels, and I came upon some news here that they're actually thinking of doing just that. So first, let me read from the Telegram channel here, as you can see on my phone. This is from a Russian channel here with 900,000 subscribers. So it says, the team of Valery Gerasimov hinted at the imminent conduct of nuclear weapons test in the Russian Federation. Vladimir Prokhvatilov, Academician of the Academy of Military Sciences of the Russian Federation, which its president is Gerasimov. Now, the president is this guy here. Remember, this is the highest ranking general in Russia, and he was just put in charge of the military operation in Ukraine, right? So this is pretty much coming out of the people around him, right? Out of his think tank. So it continues here. So it says, the man that actually said this was Vladimir Prokhvatilov, academician of the Academy of Military Sciences of the Russian Federation, said that conducting nuclear tests on the territory of the country could stop the supply of Western weapons to Ukraine. In his opinion, this will be an important and necessary threat in the current situation. It is possible to resume nuclear weapons tests on Novaya Zemlya and motivate this by the urgent need to check the state of nuclear weapons. Because computer simulations of nuclear tests that have been carried out in recent years do not give a reliable picture. There is a danger that this formidable weapon may go out of acceptable conditions. So he's saying here, hey, on top of sending a message to the West to stop providing more weapons to Ukraine, we actually also have to test that these weapons are still working. They've been in storage for so long that you don't want to, come upon the situation or the day where you actually have to use them and then they don't work. Explained Gerasimov's comrade in arms. Earlier, it became known that Sergei Shoigu is now actively preparing proposals for Vladimir Putin to expand options for the use of nuclear weapons by Russia. According to these plans, even their use in the Ukrainian conflict is allowed in extreme cases. So, again, the idea here is that they hold these nuclear weapon tests in order to make sure that the weapons are actually working like they're supposed to, and also at the same time to send a message to the West that if they continue to send weapons, then Russia has the ability to destroy Ukraine with these weapons. Now, one of the island here that they're planning on, having these nuclear tests is an island where they held the nuclear tests before, back during the nuclear arms race. And as you can see here, it's right up here. This is Novaya Zemlya. I believe this is where Russia actually tested their largest nuclear weapon, the Tsar Bomba. So you can see Ukraine is right down here. So this is where they would hold their nuclear weapons tests. Now, immediately after reading that, I actually, like I like to do, I went on Google and I tried to find news reports on what I read there. And after going through a couple of pages and doing some digging, I was able to find two news articles that actually reported on this. Of course, you're not going to see it being reported by any mainstream West media sources because they want to pretend like Russia just isn't going to use these weapons, like they're not an option. That's why they continue to provide these weapons to Ukraine, because this is the perfect opportunity for them to inflict casualties on Russia, and I'm specifically talking about the United States, without actually spilling any American blood. So I actually did find two articles here which pretty much confirmed what I just read there from that Telegram post. One of them from the Pledge Times here, you can see military analyst calls for nuclear exercises near Finnish border. And then we have another one which we'll actually be reading from. This is by News Beezer. The Military Academy of Russia proposes detonating the atomic bomb. But before we take a look at the article here, I actually want to go read an analysis made by this man, Michael McFall. He was a former ambassador, a U.S. ambassador to Russia, as you can see here, from 2012 to 2014. You can actually go follow him on Twitter. I mean, this guy is he's gone full American propaganda against Russia. If you go look at his tweets, he's pretty much warmongering every day and putting up a whole bunch of posts claiming that Ukraine is winning, that the U.S. needs to do more to support Ukraine. And he actually posted an article here yesterday, which is pretty crazy. It's called How to Get a Breakthrough in Ukraine. And we're going to go ahead and read a section that caught my eye because it has to do with his belief on Russia's probability of using nuclear weapons. Now, if you can go read the whole article yourself, but essentially this guy is saying that this is the year to go all in for Ukraine, to send as many weapons as they need, and pretty much the most advanced weapons that the Americans have and all these other nations. Because essentially through the article, he makes the case that as the longer this war drags on, especially throughout this year, and the fewer the victories for the Ukrainians, then the more that Ukraine is going to lose support by all these other nations that have been supplying weapons and money, because they're not seeing any results. So he makes the case that now is the moment, the critical moment, to go all in, to send fighter jets and missiles and everything that the West has in order to show some results of all this support. And he says that, the West doesn't have to worry about Russia using nuclear weapons because Vladimir Putin is not that insane, which I completely disagree with. This guy is absolutely nuts. He has, terrible analysis. And again, he's always posting a whole bunch of nonsense and lies. But let me read just this paragraph here where he's talking about this. So he actually titles it Risk Calculus. Soon after the war began, many observers, including me, worried that Putin would view the provision of these kinds of offensive weapons as escalatory. And yet, after deployment of these major weapon systems, Putin so far still has not escalated. Sorry, guys, it's my cat out there. He's messing with my Alexa there. So it says, Putin so far still has not escalated. The reason is simple. Putin has no good way of doing so. He is already using very expensive cruise missiles to attack apartment buildings. Again, more Western propaganda here. We know that the missile that landed in the Dnipro region was accidental because the Ukrainian army actually shot it down, and the missile ended up landing on the apartment building. And again, the Ukrainians have been attacking randomly a whole bunch of civilian buildings, but they never report on that, right? So he continues, he cannot attack NATO lest he risk a broader war that Russia would lose quickly. That leaves him with only the nuclear option, but even that would not serve him well. Everyone agrees that a nuclear attack against the United States or other NATO countries is off the table. It's not off the table. The Russians have clearly stated that they could resort to that if all these nations gathered together against Russia, because mutual assured destruction is still in place. The probabilities of Putin using a tactical nuclear weapon inside Ukraine is also very unlikely, as it would serve no obvious battlefield objective. No, it would serve an objective. That's to destroy Ukraine and end this war sooner. That's literally what nuclear weapons would do. It would not stop Ukrainians from fighting. Yes, it would stop them from fighting, just like it stopped the Japanese, who were known for literally not surrendering. Just the opposite. They would recommit to defeating Russia and even unleash more attacks, including covert operations against targets inside Russia. Using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine also would rally greater opposition to the war around the world, including in Beijing, within Russian society, and maybe even among Russian generals. So, pretty much what this guy is saying is that Russia would not dare to use nuclear weapons because, again, that could escalate to an all-out nuclear war, which would pretty much mean the end of the world, and he's right about that. But also the fact he's pretty much predicting that if Russia does use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, then China and all these other countries are going to turn on Russia because they're scared of an all-out nuclear war. Which, again, it's very interesting that he's saying that, because these are the kind of people that are actually influencing the decision-making, like around Joe Biden, right, and all the generals. This is the kind of Western American propaganda that these people lend an ear to. And so I find it very strange that, the United States and these other countries, right, they keep talking about peace talks, but at the same time, they keep sending just enough weapons to keep the Ukrainians going, but not enough to actually threaten Russia. So what I've been thinking is that they're sort of trying to push Russia into using a nuclear bomb because, again, like this former ambassador was saying, they think that if Russia does that, then they're going to turn into the big bad boogeyman on the national stage, and so all its allies are going to turn on them. But I think that's where they're wrong. Now, again, I'm a Christian. I believe in the Bible. I think all this is spiritual in nature. I think that God is sending an anti-Russian spirit on the Western world in order to carry out his purpose, his fulfillment of his word. So these people are making all these decisions that really are only going to hurt them further, and they're just plain wrong. If Russia uses a nuclear bomb in Ukraine, I don't think Russia is going to turn on them, nor any of their allies. but I think that that will actually end the war a lot more quickly because the United States is definitely not willing to go to nuclear war, all out destruction over the Ukrainian people. They're just not. And that is evident by the fact that they haven't even sent their full military or their best weapons, and the weapons that they are sending are only just enough to keep the Ukrainians believing that at some day they will go all in, which they are not. But it's very interesting as these military analysts are saying here out of the military academy that Russia could carry out a nuclear test. Now, in this day and age of social media, you can just imagine how quickly footage of that explosion, of a nuclear explosion test, would spread throughout the world and what kind of message it would send to everybody who really isn't paying much attention to this war, right? I think a lot of people would wake up to the realization of what these weapons can do, and I think it will actually make a lot of people in the United States and in Western countries pretty much ask all their politicians to end this war as quickly as possible. So, again, I've been thinking for a while now, why doesn't Russia hold nuclear tests to show America that they are willing to use these weapons, right? Because again, what the United States is trying to do is take advantage as much as they can of this proxy war they're carrying out on Russia through Ukraine, right? They don't care that Ukrainians are dying, right? As long as American blood isn't being spilled, they'll continue to send enough weapons to try to inflict as much damage as they can to Russian reserves and the Russian populace. And so they pretty much see this as the golden opportunity for them. But again, all the while, it's like they're blind to the existence of nuclear weapons. And Russia has said they will only use these in defensive measures. But like we're about to read here, they could actually hold nuclear tests, physical tests, not computer tests, an actual detonation, and show the West who they are actually dealing with here. So now let's jump into the report here. The resumption of nuclear testing will force NATO countries to halt arms sales to Ukraine and force Kyiv to abandon the threat of an attack on Crimea, said Vladimir Prokhvatilov, a senior fellow at the Russian Academy of Military Sciences. Moscow Times quoted, "We must resume nuclear weapons tests on Novaya Zemlya," which is the island I just showed you right up here, justifying this with the urgent need to check the state of the nuclear arsenal, added the scientists, speaking about the island archipelago in the Arctic Ocean where the Soviet Union established its nuclear test site in the 1950s. On October 30th, 1961, the world's largest nuclear charge to date was detonated there, the Tsar bomb, with a capacity of 58 megatons. Now, we actually know that these weapons can pretty much get exponentially bigger. Go check out my video on just how big nuclear weapons can get. It's pretty incredible, guys. They can actually make, I think an American scientist at one time proposed a 10,000 megaton bomb that can literally destroy a whole state, like completely, like the whole of the UK, just one bomb. So, yeah, go check out that video. Focus magazine wrote in 2015 that the power of the nuclear explosions at the Soviet military training ground in Novaya Zemlya, or Semlya, exceeded the sum of all explosions during World War II by more than 130 times. The Kremlin did not count on people or natural consequences, it says. Russian scientists on the atomic bomb should they threaten us. According to Prokhvatilov, the computer simulation of nuclear tests that has been used in recent years does not provide a reliable picture, as he added, "There is a risk that this powerful weapon will go beyond acceptable conditions." The scientist also called on the Russian authorities to withdraw from all contracts that Moscow has not yet broken. North Korea conducts nuclear tests. Was she attacked? No, they only threaten her. Let's threaten them too, he said. Prokhvatilov is convinced that the detonation of the nuclear bomb during the tests will convince Ukraine's Western allies not to supply tanks and other weapons there, and will force the authorities in Kyiv to abandon the threat of an attack on Crimea and the destruction of the bridge across the Kerch Strait connecting the annexed peninsula to mainland Ukraine, which is currently under Russian occupation. So there you have it, guys. Now, personally, I've been thinking that at some point during this conflict, we will see at the very least, a small nuclear explosion. Now, again, Russia could have ended this war within days if they actually used these weapons. And the United States isn't going to launch their nuclear bombs just because Ukraine gets attacked by nuclear weapons. But it seems that, as we've seen here throughout all these analysts and all these reports, that the objective for Russia was not to kill Ukrainian people. They don't want to kill the Ukrainian populace, right? Their intention was only to protect Russia and to pretty much push out any American and NATO forces away from its border so that they could impose a nuclear threat to Russia, right? By putting nuclear missiles in Ukraine, which could reach Moscow within 5 minutes, which is exactly what they are doing. But again, the West is taking advantage of the situation to inflict as much damage as they can to the Russian military by killing its soldiers through this proxy war, by taking advantage of the Ukrainians, right? And so at some point, they're going to have to realize that the United States is going to continue to do this as long as they can, right? We know that they just promised these tanks, and so just how much Russian blood is Vladimir Putin willing to spill because he doesn't want to spill that much Ukrainian blood, right? Or civilian blood. Like, at some point, you have to prioritize your countrymen and your people. Now, I was thinking of an actual, small tactical nuclear detonation in Ukraine, but I think this would actually, of course, be more safe. If they actually carry out a nuclear test, they're not actually hurting anybody, but at the same time, the footage is gonna be so shocking around the world that I think a lot of people are going to call for their governments to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. So now, as we read there from that ambassador's article, he thinks it's going to have the opposite effect, right? But he was talking more so of an attack on Ukraine. He really wasn't calculating the possibility of it just being a nuclear test. So this, again, the only reason that this war has been prolonged is because these Western powers have been supplying these weapons to Ukraine, right? That's the only reason that Ukraine is holding on. So I think that Putin is going to take a serious look here at a nuclear test. And again, I think that, it would also serve them, it would also help them in actually, seeing that these weapons still work, right? That when they actually need them, they will explode. So it will have both of those effects. It will send a message to the Western powers that are trying to inflict as much damage on Russia as they can, and it will also help them to actually test out their weapons to make sure that they're actually working and that they're ready to go. Now, again, guys, I'm not a warmonger, right? I'm not a war hog. I'm not a war pig. War is evil. But again, I do believe we are living in the end of days. but I don't think we are going to see a nuclear holocaust over Ukraine. Now, I think we could see the use of nuclear weapons, but now I'm thinking that this is probably the most likely option here, a nuclear test, and then I think that the Western powers will back down because they're not willing to risk their nations over Ukraine. And again, they're sort of pretending, or they're willfully playing ignorant, right? And they're trying to pretend like Russia doesn't have these weapons, like these weapons aren't part of the equation, and that Russia's just going to sit there and take it and keep having their Russian soldiers killed just because, they don't want to inflict that much damage on Ukraine. But I think they're foolish. And again, I think that God is working in all of this, and he's actually allowing the Americans to make these terrible decisions, because eventually after this conflict ends, which I believe it's going to end here pretty soon, I think it's going to end this year, there will be a nuclear war in the future. That's according to the Bible. This world has to be purified and it has to be cleansed of evil, of sin, and corruption. But I don't think it's going to take place over Ukraine. However, guys, here's my prediction. I predict and I think that we will see a nuclear test, a nuclear explosion before this conflict is over. So, you heard it here, guys. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments. Again, make sure you give this video a like and make sure you subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, the truth is stranger than fiction. Have a wonderful day and God bless.